In this video, I want to explain how to do your seasonal tire changes. So that's from winter tires to summer tires, which is what I'm going to show you here now. Also from summer to winter again, same procedure. I really like to do this in my driveway, and I recommend you do as well. It's faster than going to the garage and waiting around and having them doing it. And it also builds your capabilities and your self-reliance. And it'll give you a chance to just take a quick look at your brakes and look under the vehicle and maybe spot things that need some repairs. So let's get started. I want to talk about some of the tools I have here. Some you'll need, some are optional. It makes the job easier. I guess the first thing to look at is a jack. This is just the regular car jack. I have other jacks, I could use them too, but I recommend that you use your car's own jack so that you get practice using it, so that you know that it works properly and you know how to use it under the vehicle, so that if you ever have to change a tire out on the road, you're not lost. You're not bumbling around, fooling around with this for the first time. So that's the car jack, and it comes with a handle too. I'll show you this in a minute as we use it. Another tool that comes with the car is something to remove the wheel nuts. You can use this if you like, but it's fairly short, which means that you have to pull in it harder to loosen off the nuts. So what I like to use is a long bar like this. This car requires a 21mm socket to fit the nuts, so that's what I've got on here. You won't have this out on the road if you have to change a tire. You'll have that shorter wrench, which can work, but this is just a little more comfortable. Now you're also going to need a torque wrench. A torque wrench is something that allows you to precisely tighten nuts and bolts to a certain predetermined level. When I was growing up, everybody changed from summer to winter tires and back again, and that's because summer tires were so bad back then. There was a time, beginning in the 1980s, when all-season radials kicked in, and I didn't know anybody who changed their tires seasonally for about a 20-year period of time. Everyone kind of relied on these all-season radials, even here in Canada with lots of snow. That's changed slowly, and it's gathering steam. I think it's a good idea for most vehicles because even the all-season radials aren't nearly as good as snow tires. Another change that's happened in the time that I've been driving and working on cars is the use of torque wrenches to precisely tighten the wheel nuts. That started about 20 years ago or so, maybe around 2000, a little bit earlier. There was a spate of truck tires that came off and injured people on the road, and so authorities got a little more stringent about mechanics using torque wrenches to properly tighten the wheel nuts. So it's a great idea for anyone. They're not that expensive, and they'll just make sure you're doing a really good job. This is my socket set here. This is where I got that 21mm socket from. This is just a great set to have around for all kinds of applications. And one other thing, before we get busy, is this stuff here. I'm a big fan of oil spraying vehicles annually. I live in the Rust Belt. My oldest vehicle is a 31-year-old Ford pickup truck. Those things were not known for their rust resistance, but mine has no rust on it because of annual oil spray, which I do with a big sprayer, and that's a topic for a whole other video. But when I have the wheel off, I like to use one of these spray cans to get into areas that would be difficult to get into when I'm doing the big job, which I usually do in the fall. So I'll show you how I use this. Strictly speaking, this is not an essential part of changing your tires, and maybe where you live and there's some nice warm place where it doesn't really matter, you don't need to think about this, but I'll mention it in passing. So step one, the jack. This is what you call a scissor jack. This handle will go in here when I put it under the vehicle and allow me to turn the jack and raise it. Now your owner's manual will show you where the manufacturer's jack needs to go, but typically, and I'll show you this close up in a minute, but typically there's a spot on the side of the body. In this case, we're working on the front wheel. It would be a little bit behind the front wheel. And there's a slot here. The slot engages a kind of a tab that you'll see in a second, and that stops the jack from moving around. It allows you to raise the car. So let's head on underneath and I'll show you where this jack goes on this vehicle. So lying on the ground is a big part of this operation, and I'm here ready to position the jack. If you look here, you can see this kind of a tab I was talking about, this little thing here. That's designed to go into the slot of the jack. You don't want to use the jack in other places because it's not necessarily strong enough. So I'm turning it by hand just to get it up to the height I need. Look at that. Jacks are amazing. I'm just turning it with my fingers, and I'm already starting to lift up the vehicle. So let me get the handle, and we'll raise it up a little bit more, but not quite as far as you might think, at least not for this initial part of the job. So I'm taking some of the weight off the wheel, because my next step after this is to start loosening the wheel nuts. And I don't want to have the full weight of the vehicle on those studs where the nuts are. But by the same token, I don't want the wheel completely in the air either, because having the wheel on the ground stops it from rotating when I'm undoing the nuts. Now I should mention too that you'll want to set the parking brake before you do this operation, and you want to work on a flat surface. And at this stage I've taken enough weight off that wheel that I'm going to grab that wrench and loosen the nuts. So my job right now is just to loosen them a bit. I'm not going to take them right off yet. There we go. Now I'm going to jack the vehicle up further to get that wheel right off the ground. But I'm going to do something else before I actually take that wheel off. And that's blocking up the vehicle as a kind of second layer of safety in case it comes off the jack. So, got a 6x6 here. I've placed it under that spot there. That's part of the frame. And these things are just going to sit here. They're not actually even going to touch the vehicle necessarily. But if this thing were ever to roll off the jack, it's going to hold, these blocks are going to hold it up. So it's not the end of the world. I've never had a vehicle roll off the jack in, 40 years of doing this. But it's a good safety precaution. Because once that wheel is off, if it were to fall down, it'd be very hard to get the vehicle back up again. You'd never get the jack underneath of it. It'd be too close to the ground. So that's just a little safety precaution. Just takes a second, and there's no reason not to do it. The vehicle and the wheel are now high enough that they're off the ground, and I can finish taking off these nuts. They're loose now, so I'm just taking them off all the way. I should mention too, I've got this piece of wood here, piece of plywood, wafer board. It's a good idea to have that because it just helps you to not lose your tools and the parts. And there we go. Now, at this stage, I want to point out a few things. First of all, it's not unusual for mud and dried on caked dirt to build up on the inside of rims like this. And if you see that, you should wash it off. You should wet it so it gets soft and clean it all off, because when that dirt builds up here, it can cause the tire to become unbalanced. So you might as well get everything ready to go for next time. So that's one thing. Another thing, I guess at this stage I should talk to you a bit about tire rotation. So what that means is that during the life of the tire, the position of that tire gets moved to different spots in the vehicle in order to even out the wear. Because it's quite conceivable that, say, one side of the tire might wear more than another side because of where it is in the vehicle. So that when you move the position of that tire, there's a very good chance that you're going to start wearing the less worn side. So basically it's just a way of getting the most wear and tread life out of your tires. But rotation has to happen in different ways, and it depends on your vehicle, and it depends on the tires you're using. And this particular job with this vehicle is a good example. So, see this tire here? This is the winter tire I'm taking off. You know, even in Canada, we have summer eventually, and it's time to put on the summer tires. But look here. You see? Rotation. That means that this tire is designed to roll in one direction. This way, in this case. Not that way. So this is what they call a unidirectional tire. Now, it wouldn't be the end of the world if you put it on so that it went the other way. It just wouldn't work as well, especially in winter. This is a great winter tire, actually. It's a studded tire. Where I live in Ontario, Canada, we're allowed to have metal studs in our tires in order to increase traction. And these things are superb. This vehicle, with regular winter tires on it, it's one of the worst vehicles we run in the winter. But this same vehicle, with these studded tires on, it's actually one of the best vehicles in the winter. Almost as good as my four-wheel drive truck, believe it or not. So, a little bit about the tire, but the main thing to understand is this is a unidirectional tire, which means the only place I can move it next fall, is directly behind, in the passenger side rear. If this was a bidirectional tire, so a tire that can properly roll in either direction, like the summer ones I'm going to be putting on, well then those can be rotated from one side of the vehicle to the other. So from the front on one side to the back on the other, the next time you put them on. And the same with the other side. So you can rotate them in a kind of a cross pattern. Now things get a little more complicated if your vehicle has a full-size spare. Because ideally what you want to do then is you want to work that full-size spare into the rotation. So you're actually using the spare sometimes. You're using up the tread on the spare. Now, the best way to find out how to rotate the tires in your case is by going online. That's kind of a topic for another video. I'm really just focusing on the actual changing of the tire now. But basically you want to know, does your car have a full-size spare or a compact spare? If it's a compact spare, you can just ignore it. It doesn't enter into the rotation. But if it's a full-size spare, you might want to include it in the rotation. Are you running unidirectional tires or bidirectional tires? That's another question. All kinds of information on this online, so you can figure that out easily enough for your vehicle. But for now, let's take a look here. There's a few things I want to show you that aren't exactly to do with changing these tires, but it's a great time to examine them now. This, as I said before, this is one of the reasons why I like to do this, because I get to keep my eye on what's going on and make sure this vehicle runs safely. So let's go over here and take a look. This video is not about brake inspections. That's a topic for another video. But since you got the brakes staring you in the face, you might as well do a superficial examination. There's not much to that, really. This is a disc brake. This disc rotates, and when you put on the brakes, this caliper here squeezes some brake pads in on the rotor, and that's what slows you down. Now I can tell this rotor is in good shape. These brakes aren't very old. I changed them, I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000 miles ago, so lots of life left on them. I'd be surprised if there was any issue because I changed the rotors, the pads, and the caliper. So there should be many, many more miles of life, but it's still good to look at it. And you can see there's nice even wear here. There's no chunky look to it. There's no pitting. These brakes are working just fine. Now, as I said before, it's difficult for me to rust-proof this area when I'm doing the main job in the fall. You want to keep that oil spray that I use away from the brakes, of course, and that's hard to do with the big gun when you're doing it the main job, and that's why I like to use a spray can now and then. So I'm just going to go over, I'm just going to give a little shot to everything that looks like it could rust. Now's the time to do it. You don't necessarily have to do this. As I said, this is part of my rust-proofing regime. It certainly served me well over the years. I should mention, just to emphasize again, you don't want to get any of that spray on the brake parts. This has to be dry in order to work properly. And if you get a lot of oil on there, you could ruin your brake pads. So you don't want to do that, but just a little shot here and there. This kind of oil spray, I call it an oil spray. It's not really an oil, but it does creep, which means you spray it on one place. Over a period of months, it's slowly going to work its way to dry areas in nooks and crannies. So this is why it works so well. Even in Rust City, which is where I live, structural body rust will be a non-issue if you do the rust spray every year. But topic for another video. Right now, I want to turn your attention to that wheel that I just took off, which is here. There's a couple of things. I mentioned before about the need to make sure it's clean inside here. This isn't too bad. I've changed tires sometimes and had huge buildups of mud, and not even either. So it makes the tire unbalanced enough that I have to wash it off. But I'll just rub this off here, and that'll be plenty clean. Now what I like to do at this stage is to get a white marker, and on the inside sidewall of the tire, I'm going to write where this tire needs to go next time. So if you remember, this is a unidirectional tire, so I can't put it on the diagonally opposite corner because then the tire would be rolling the wrong way, the way it was not designed to roll. So I'm just going to put it directly behind. So I'm going to mark this with this white marker. I'm going to write P for passenger, and I'm going to write rear. So I know in the fall that this tire needs to go back there. There's no question about that. I am almost ready to put on the summer tire, which is slated to go in this spot. But before I do, I want to talk about these things. In the world of mechanics, these threaded bolt-like things are called studs. And it's part of the hub on this particular vehicle. A lot of vehicles are like this. And this is the nut that goes on. So, do you see how it's a little bit greasy looking? That's because of a product I put on called anti-seize. Different companies make it. It's kind of like a grease, but it's different than grease in that it's designed to stop these threads from locking up from corrosion. Now, I have been using anti-seize on wheel studs for 40 years, and I've never had a problem, and I've certainly seen the benefit. The benefit is that the nuts come off more smoothly, they tighten up more smoothly, and there's never any issue. I have seen vehicles where this has never been applied, and the nuts come off, they make a big loud sound, they're kind of stiff to get off, because rust is setting in. Now in the world of mechanics, it's kind of 50-50 about whether you should use anti-seize on wheel studs or not. I know some mechanics who swear by it, they use it all the time. Other mechanics say, oh no, never put anti-seize on studs, it's dangerous, it's going to make the wheel nuts come off and all the rest of it. Well, if that's true, how come it hasn't happened in 40 years and many, many vehicles I've worked on? So I'm sold, and I really don't think you have any concerns whatsoever of wheel nuts coming off accidentally if you use a torque wrench in the proper way, which is what I'll show you in a minute or two. But for now, we're all set to put the summer tire on and to install these wheel nuts. I don't need to put any more anti-seize on because there's enough residual here. In practice, I might put it on every 2 or 3 years, and just a little bit, just enough to coat the surface and to do the job. So I'm ready to put the wheel on. I've cleaned the inside of the rim. I've also cleaned this surface here because this is the part that's going to bolt tightly against the hub, and I don't want any grit or anything in here because that can cause the wheel to work loose. So I've wiped this clean. I've also wiped clean the area of the hub where the wheel's going to rest. I want that to be nice and clean too. This wheel came from the driver's side rear, and because it's a bi-directional tire, I can move it from one side of the vehicle to the other for that whole rotation business. I've got a rubbing pad here. I'm just going to rub out the marker notation that I did the last time so that I got a fresh slate come fall when I'm taking this thing off. Right now, I just, you have to lift the wheel up a little bit to get it on the studs. Okay. Now it comes time to put on the nuts, just finger tight. We're coming up to a bit of a critical point here where it's possible for you to make a mistake if you don't know what to look for. You definitely do not want to tighten up the wheel nuts all the way, just one at a time. Wheel nuts like this need to be tightened what they call sequentially. I'll show you that in a minute, but it's tightening them slowly around the perimeter before you get down to the final tightening. So I'm going to use the wrench here, but I'm not going to use it as a wrench. I'm basically just using it to help me tighten the wheel nuts by hand. Now, that's what you call finger tight. If I just reefed that down and tightened it quite tightly while all the others are loose, it can cause the hub to warp. It can cause the rim to crack. You want to do it slowly and after finger tightening. So I can go from one nut to the other around the perimeter for this finger tight stage. But the next stage of tightening after this, I'm going to skip every nut as I do an initial tightening, as you'll see. And that's because I want to slowly tighten the nuts. I don't want to do it all at once for one nut and then move on to the next one. There we go. We're finger tight. Things are looking good. I'm just going to tighten this a bit. Not a whole lot. You know, talking a quarter of a rotation. Because there's an uneven number of nuts in this vehicle, when I skip one, I'm automatically kind of getting in sync to properly snug them up just a little bit at a time. So there's this one, and I'm skipping. There's this one, I'm skipping. That one, I'm skipping. Just making them a little bit tighter each time. Now, at this stage, the wheel nuts are tight enough that I can lower the jack a little bit so that the tire starts to rub on the ground. So I get sufficient friction that the friction is what's stopping the wheel from turning as I do the final tightening. Now before I do that, I need to pull out those blocks that I put underneath, the safety blocks, just so I can get the tire down. I don't want full weight on the tire yet until I get these things fully tightened. But then again, I also don't want it in the air because I want the help of friction to aid in holding that tire steady. So the wheel is starting to contact the ground now, but a good part of the weight is still on the jack. That should do it right there. I think we're on the ground sufficiently. Now, do you remember before I told you that we want to have the wheel nuts precisely tightened? Not too little, but also not too much. And that's where the torque wrench comes in. A torque wrench like this lets you know when you've tightened to a certain tightness. And the certain tightness can be adjusted. Foot-pounds. Foot-pounds. That's a description of torque or twisting force. And if you go online and you Google wheel nut torque for your vehicle, it will come up with a figure. Check 2 or 3 places to make sure that you've got it correct. But it's pretty simple. And this torque wrench can be adjusted. You see, the more I turn this handle, it starts to go up. It starts to rise on the body of the wrench. I mean, for instance, right there. The top of this is pretty much level with the 70 foot-pounds torque rating. Now, as I recall, 70 foot-pounds is the correct torque for this vehicle, but before I commit to that, I'm just going to pop over to my computer and double check. So, wheel nut torque, 2009 Lexus ES350, that's the vehicle we're working on. What does that say? 76 foot-pounds. Let's go down a little further. Is that confirmed? Yeah, here's another one, 76 foot-pounds. That sounds about right. Now, as I said before, it's only been about 15 or 20 years that even licensed mechanics are using torque wrenches to torque down wheel nuts. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world if you got it 80 or 65 psi or even 90 foot-pounds, 90 foot-pounds. Not that big of a deal, but torque wrenches are widely available. They're inexpensive. You should get one and look up your vehicle and adjust things appropriately. So I've got my torque wrench adjusted to the proper level, 76 foot-pounds, and I've got my 21 millimeter socket. The nuts are partially tight. Now I'm just bringing them home to final tightness. And this is how a torque wrench tells you when you've reached the proper torque. Listen. Okay, that's the sound it makes when you've reached as tight as it should be. Now after the click, I could keep on tightening if I want, but the click tells me not to go on any further. So I'm going to skip one, skip one, skip one. There we go. Now that should be it. I'm going to take the jack right out and I'm going to check it again. But that's not the last time I'm going to check these wheel nuts either. Going to give it another check. And then we're done. We're done this wheel. 3 more to go, just like that. And this is very important, drive your vehicle for about 50 miles or so, and then check the nuts again with a torque wrench. I have never had wheel nuts come loose on me over the years, but I have seen other people where the wheel nuts come loose. You don't want that to happen, and double checking after a little bit of driving, giving things a chance to loosen up if they're going to. Check it with the torque wrench and you're all ready to roll. So that's the process in a nutshell. It helps you to get a little bit closer to your vehicle, helps you to build up some skills and self-reliance, saves you some time, and I think it's the way to go. So I forgot to mention 2 things. I finished all 4 wheels. I've taken the car out for a test drive. It runs great. It's all set to go. But the torque wrench, it's a precision instrument. This is a Craftsman. It's a really nice torque wrench. I really like it a lot. It's certified too, actually. Certified to be accurate. You can see the certification data, calibration testing. So it's accurate within a couple of % of what it's supposed to be. But when you store it, back off on the adjustment. So you see I've backed off all the way. This collar here used to be up at about 76 or so foot-pounds. I've backed it all the way off for storage. I think it'll hold its calibration longer when you do take the time to do that. Now another thing, the seasonal changing of your tires is a great time to check the air pressure, and it's not unusual for tires that have been in storage for half a year to have less air in them than they should. Even without an official leak, air leaves tires at about a pound, 1 psi every month or 2. So it's an important time now to check that pressure and top it up. You probably will have to top it up. And here's what I like to do. Look on the sidewall here. Here we are. Okay, max pressure 44 psi. You see that? So that's as much as this tire is supposed to have. with that much air in it, it can have the maximum load. But what I like to do is to fill my tires 10% less than the maximum. A firm, hard tire rolls easier and you get better mileage. And as long as you're below the maximum, you're fine. So you can do this at an auto garage that has publicly accessible compressed air. I live in the middle of nowhere. The nearest publicly accessible compressed air around me is probably 25 or 30 miles away. So I have this unit here. I've got other compressors too in the shop, but this is a great little unit. I've used it for maybe 3 years or so. It's cordless, uses the same battery as cordless tools, and it's a pretty smart little unit. Let me show you something. So you boot it up, you power it on, and it's showing 0, 0. Okay, so I hook it up, and that figure there is showing me how much air is in the tire. Now, 10% less than 44 is 40. So I'm turning this dial to the desired pressure. And now I hit the start button. And look at that. It's rising as the tire fills with air. And when it reaches the 40-pound mark, it's going to automatically shut off. So nothing could be easier. It's very foolproof. I really like this because it's portable. I mean, I don't have to drive the car over to my workshop where the compressor is. I can do it here. It'll do big tires. It'll pump up a lot of tires on a charge. In fact, I've never run it down, and I've pumped up 4, 5, 6 tires at a time. Some big tractor tires too. It still does the job. Then you just take it off and away you go. So there you have it. Everything you need to know to be your own tire changing expert.